The sun hung low over Clearwater Ridge, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of the frontier town. Jake "Blackjack" Morgan dismounted his horse outside the livery stable, his spurs jangling against the hard-packed earth. Dust clung to his weathered leather coat, and beneath the brim of his black hat, dark eyes surveyed the street with the wariness of a man who'd learned never to let his guard down. He'd ridden hard for 3 days, putting distance between himself and the law in Fort Worth. The wanted posters bearing his likeness promised $500 to anyone who could bring him in, dead or alive. Most folks preferred the former when it came to outlaws like him. The stable was dim and cool, filled with a familiar sense of hay, leather, and horse sweat. Jake led his stallion, Midnight, to an empty stall, running a hand along the animal's neck. The horse had served him well through countless escapes, and he treated the beast better than he'd ever treated most humans. "That's a fine animal." The voice startled him. Soft, feminine, and entirely unexpected. Jake's hand instinctively moved toward the Colt .45 at his hip before he caught sight of her. She stood in a shaft of sunlight streaming through the barn door, golden hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet, wearing a blue calico dress that marked her as respectable folk. Everything about her screamed innocence, from her clear green eyes to the way she held herself with quiet dignity. "Miss." Jake touched the brim of his hat, keeping his voice neutral. He'd learned long ago that pretty faces could be just as dangerous as loaded guns. "I haven't seen you in town before," she said, stepping closer. There was curiosity in her eyes, not fear. Most decent women crossed the street when they saw men like him coming. "Just passing through." Jake turned back to his horse, hoping she'd take the hint and leave. The last thing he needed was complications, especially not the kind that came wrapped in calico and sunshine. Passing through to where? Jake's jaw tightened. The girl had no sense of self-preservation. "That's not your concern, Miss." She moved closer still, and he caught the scent of lavender soap and something sweet. Vanilla, maybe. Clean scents that had no business mixing with the trail dust and gun oil that clung to him like a second skin. "You're right, of course. I apologize for my rudeness." She extended a gloved hand. "I'm Emma Sullivan." Jake stared at the offered hand like it might bite him. Sullivan. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd seen it on the sheriff's office when he'd ridden in, painted in neat black letters, "Sheriff Thomas Sullivan, Law and Order for Clearwater Ridge." "You're the sheriff's daughter." It wasn't a question. A slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Guilty as charged, and you are leaving." Jake moved past her toward the stable door, but she stepped into his path. The top of her head barely reached his shoulder, but there was steel in her spine. "That's an unusual name." Despite himself, Jake felt his mouth twitch. "You always this forward with strangers, Miss Sullivan?" "Only the interesting ones." Her eyes traveled over him, taking in the worn boots, the gun belt sitting low on his hips, the day's worth of stubble darkening his jaw. "And you, sir, are definitely interesting. Your father know you're here talking to strange men in stables?" The question should have shamed her, sent her running back to whatever safe, respectable place she'd come from. Instead, she lifted her chin. "My father doesn't control where I go or who I talk to." Maybe he should. The words came out harsher than Jake intended. He'd seen what happened to innocent girls who got tangled up with men like him. It never ended well. "Don't stay too close to me, Miss Sullivan. I'm not the kind of man young ladies should be associating with." "And what kind of man is that?" Jake stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, close enough that he could see the faint freckles dusting her nose, the way her breath quickened. "The dangerous kind, the kind your father warns you about. The kind that brings nothing but trouble." She didn't step back. "Maybe I like trouble." "No," Jake said quietly. "You don't. You just think you do because you've been sheltered your whole life in this little town. Probably never seen anything worse than a Saturday night drunk or a barn fire. You don't know what real trouble looks like." "Then show me." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with more meaning than either of them was ready to acknowledge. Jake studied her face, looking for any sign of the empty-headed flirtation he'd seen in other bored small-town girls. But Emma Sullivan's eyes held something else: intelligence, determination, and a hunger for something more than the life laid out before her. It was that hunger that worried him most. "Your father's a good man," Jake said finally. "Keeps the peace, protects the town. Men like that don't take kindly to men like me, sniffing around their daughters." "Men like you," Emma repeated. "You keep saying that, but you haven't told me your name." Jake was saved from answering by the sound of boots on the boardwalk outside. 3 sets, moving with purpose. His body tensed, hand dropping to his gun. "Emma, you in there, girl?" Sheriff Thomas Sullivan's voice carried the authority of a man used to being obeyed. Jake had heard that voice before, laying down the law in a dozen frontier towns. It was the voice of civilization trying to tame the wild. "I'm here, Papa," Emma called back, but her eyes never left Jake's face, just admiring this gentleman's horse. The sheriff appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 deputies. Thomas Sullivan was a big man, broad-shouldered and straight-backed, with iron-gray hair and a mustache to match. His badge caught the light, and his hand rested casual-like on the butt of his peacemaker. His eyes, the same green as his daughter's, but harder, took in the scene, Emma standing too close to a trail-worn stranger, the stranger's hand near his gun, the tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. "Emma, head on home. Your mother's got supper waiting." "But Papa, now." There was no arguing with that tone. Emma gathered her skirts, but as she passed Jake, she whispered, "I'll see you again." It sounded more like a promise than a farewell. Jake watched her go, knowing he should be smart and ride out tonight, put Clearwater Ridge in his dust and never look back. But something about the way she'd looked at him, like she could see past the wanted posters and the reputation to something he'd thought was long dead. "Mister, I don't know who you are," Sheriff Sullivan said, his voice cutting through Jake's thoughts. "But I know what you are. We don't want no trouble in Clearwater Ridge." "No trouble, Sheriff. Just need to rest my horse. Maybe get a meal and a bed for the night." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "1 night, come sunrise. You'd best be moving on, and you stay clear of my daughter. Understand?" Jake touched his hat brim. "Crystal clear, Sheriff." But as the lawman and his deputies left, Jake knew it was already too late. Emma Sullivan had looked at him like he was somebody worth knowing, and that was more dangerous than any bullet. He'd warned her to stay away, told her plain as day that he was trouble. But something in those green eyes told him she wasn't the type to listen to warnings, not even from dangerous men in dusty coats who should know better than to linger in towns where they didn't belong. Jake Morgan, outlaw and fool, was going to stay in Clearwater Ridge. Just for 1 night, he told himself. Even he didn't believe it. The Silver Dollar Saloon was thick with smoke and the sound of clinking glasses when Jake pushed through the Batwing doors that evening. He'd taken a room at Mrs. Hutchinson's boarding house, ignoring the widow's suspicious glares and her pointed questions about how long he'd be staying. Now he needed a drink and information, in that order. The bartender, a grizzled man with arms like tree trunks, slid a whiskey across the scarred wooden bar without being asked. Jake tossed back the shot, feeling the burn chase away the dust in his throat. "Haven't seen you before," the bartender said, refilling the glass. "Just passing through." "Folks always say that. Half of 'em end up staying." The man's eyes were shrewd. "Name's Murphy. I own this place." Jake nodded but didn't offer his own name. Murphy didn't seem to expect it. "Sheriff already been by asking about you," Murphy continued, polishing a glass with practiced movements. "Sullivan's a fair man, but he don't tolerate no nonsense, especially when it comes to his daughter." Jake finished the sentence, his voice flat. Murphy's eyebrows rose. "Met her already." "Have you? That girl's got more spirit than sense sometimes. Every young buck in 3 counties has tried courting her, but she turns 'em all down flat. Smart girl. Maybe. Or maybe she's just waiting for something different to ride into town." Murphy's look was knowing. You planning on being that something different, mister? Jake drained his second whiskey. I told you, just passing through. But even as he said it, the saloon door swung open, and Emma Sullivan walked in like she owned the place. Every conversation in the room stopped. Respectable young ladies didn't enter saloons, especially not the sheriff's daughter. She wore a different dress now, deep green that brought out her eyes, and her hair was pinned up in a style that was somehow both proper and enticing. Her gaze swept the room until it found Jake at the bar, then she smiled, and he knew he was in trouble. "Miss Sullivan," Murphy stammered. "This ain't no place for—" "I'm looking for my father's deputy," Emma interrupted smoothly. "Sam Henderson. His wife sent me to fetch him home for supper." It was a lie, and everyone knew it. Sam Henderson was playing poker in the corner, but he was a bachelor who took his meals at the boarding house. Still, the deputy stood up, card still in hand, looking confused. "Ma'am?" Emma was already moving through the room, her skirts brushing past tables full of cowboys and drifters. She stopped at Jake's elbow, close enough that he could smell that lavender soap again. "Mr. Henderson, there you are," she said brightly, but her eyes were on Jake. "You really should be getting home." Sam Henderson, no fool despite his confusion, gathered his winnings and headed for the door. "Yes, ma'am, right away." The moment he was gone, Emma turned to Jake. "Buy me a drink. Your father would shoot me just for letting you stand this close." "My father's at a town council meeting. Won't be done for hours." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "Besides, I thought you were dangerous." "Are you telling me one sheriff scares you?" Jake caught Murphy's eye. The bartender shrugged and produced a bottle of his better whiskey and 2 clean glasses. Jake poured, trying to ignore the way Emma's fingers brushed his when she took the glass. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Neither should you." She sipped the whiskey without flinching, though he could tell by the way her eyes watered that she wasn't used to it. A man who warns young ladies away from him, then stays in town anyway, makes a girl curious. Curiosity's dangerous in these parts. "So you keep saying—" Emma set down her glass, barely touched. "But you still haven't told me your name, or what you're running from." "What makes you think I'm running?" She studied him with those sharp green eyes. "The way you check the door every time someone walks in. The way your hand never strays far from your gun. The fact that you rode in on a horse that's been pushed hard, covered in trail dust from at least 3 days' ride." She smiled at his surprise. "I'm the sheriff's daughter, remember? I learned to read men before I learned to read books." Jake found himself almost smiling back. "Then you should know to stay clear of men like me." "I know what everyone expects me to do," Emma said. "Marry some rancher's son, have babies, spend my days making bread and mending clothes, die in the same town where I was born, never seeing anything beyond these hills. Nothing wrong with that life. For some women, no, but I want—" She paused, searching for words. "Did you ever feel like you were suffocating? Like the life everyone planned for you was a noose around your neck?" Jake's hand went unconsciously to his throat. He'd felt the scratch of real rope there once, before midnight had scattered a posse with well-aimed hooves and given him the chance to escape. But he understood what she meant. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know that feeling." Their eyes met and held. Something passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits trapped by different cages. "Emma!" The voice cracked like a whip across the saloon. Mrs. Adelaide Morrison, the minister's wife and self-appointed guardian of the town's morality, stood in the doorway like an avenging angel in black bombazine. Her face was pinched with disapproval. "Emma Sullivan, what in the Lord's name are you doing in this den of iniquity?" Emma straightened, but didn't move away from Jake. "Good evening, Mrs. Morrison. I can see what you were doing, young lady. Consorting with riffraff and Lord knows what else." Her eyes raked over Jake with disgust. "Your father will hear about this." "I'm sure he will," Emma said calmly. "You do so enjoy keeping him informed of my activities, Mrs. Morrison's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "Come with me this instant." Emma turned to Jake, and for a moment her mask of composure slipped. He saw the desperation underneath, the wild thing beating against the bars of its cage. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "The old Miller cabin, north of town. Noon." Then she was gone, swept out of the saloon in misses. Morrison's righteous wake. The conversation slowly resumed, but Jake could feel the weight of eyes on him. The stranger who'd caught the sheriff's daughter's attention. Murphy appeared at his elbow. "Friend, let me give you some advice. That girl is nothing but trouble for a man like you. Her daddy's got plans for her, respectable plans with respectable men. You don't fit those plans." Jake poured himself another drink. "I told her to stay away. But you're hoping she won't listen." Murphy shook his head. "I've seen this play out before. Never ends well for the drifter." Jake knew he was right. Smart thing would be to saddle Midnight right now and ride out. There were other towns, other places to hide. But he kept thinking about the way Emma had looked at him, like he was a door to a world she'd only dreamed about. He'd been running for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as anything other than the Black Hat, the outlaw, the man to avoid. Emma Sullivan looked at him and saw possibility. It was the most dangerous thing anyone had done to him in years. "One more night," Jake said, as much to himself as to Murphy. "Then I'll move on." Murphy just laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Sure you will. Friend, sure you will." Outside, thunder rumbled over the mountains. A storm was coming, and Jake had the feeling it would wash away more than just the dust on Clearwater Ridge's streets. He thought about the old Miller cabin, abandoned these 5 years since the family moved on. Thought about Emma Sullivan and her green eyes full of dangerous dreams. He was going to meet her. God help him. He already knew he was going to meet her. Jake Morgan had faced down lynch mobs and bounty hunters, survived gunfights and Indian raids. But one green-eyed girl with too much courage and not enough sense might be the thing that finally killed him. He poured another whiskey and prepared to wait for noon. Morning broke gray and humid over Clearwater Ridge, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Jake stood at the window of his boarding house room, watching the town come alive. Shopkeepers swept their storefronts, ranchers loaded supplies onto wagons, and Sheriff Sullivan made his morning rounds, his star glinting even in the weak sunlight. The sheriff stopped outside the boarding house, looking up as if he could sense Jake watching. Their eyes met through the dusty glass, and Sullivan touched his hat brim, a gesture that was both greeting and warning. Then he moved on, but Jake knew the message had been delivered. "I'm watching you." Down on the street, Emma Sullivan emerged from the mercantile, a basket on her arm. She wore a simple brown dress today, her hair in a practical braid, but she might as well have been wearing silk and diamonds for the way Jake's pulse quickened. She glanced up at the boarding house, and though he couldn't be sure she saw him, a small smile played at her lips before she continued on her way. Jake turned from the window, running a hand through his dark hair. The smart thing would be to stay in this room until nightfall, then slip out of town under cover of darkness instead. He found himself checking his Colt, making sure each chamber was loaded. The dining room of the boarding house was nearly empty when he came down. Mrs. Hutchinson served him coffee and biscuits with obvious reluctance. Her mouth pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. "Planning to stay another night, Mr.?" She let the question hang, fishing for a name he hadn't given. "Haven't decided yet, ma'am." She sniffed. "Well, I run a respectable establishment. I don't cotton to troublemakers." Jake almost smiled. If she knew the truth about him, she'd probably throw him out with her own 2 hands. "No trouble for me, Mrs. Hutchinson." The door burst open, bringing with it the scent of rain and horse. A young man stood there, maybe 20 years old, with the kind of clean-cut features that mothers loved and outlaws distrusted on principle. His clothes marked him as money: good wool pants, a vest with a watch chain, boots that had seen polish more often than dust. "Mrs. Hutchinson? Is Miss Sullivan here? I was told she might be—" He stopped short, seeing Jake. Something flashed in his eyes. Jealousy, maybe, or possessiveness. "She ain't here. Mr. Thornton. Mrs. Hutchinson said, her tone warming considerably. "You might try the church. She sometimes helps her mother with the flowers." William Thornton. Jake recognized the name. The banker's son. Heir to the biggest fortune in 3 counties. The kind of man Sheriff Sullivan would want for his daughter. Thornton's eyes hadn't left Jake. "I don't believe we've met William Thornton." He didn't extend his hand. "Just passing through," Jake said, rising. He'd lost his appetite anyway. "Seems like you're taking your time about it." Thornton's voice carried the confidence of a man who'd never met a problem his father's money couldn't solve. "Some folks might get the wrong idea. Seeing a stranger lingering in town, especially one who's been seen talking to certain young ladies." Jake met his gaze steadily. "Some folks should mind their own business." Thornton's face flushed. "Emma Sullivan is my business. We have an understanding. Funny, she didn't mention you." The younger man stepped forward. Fists clenched. "Mrs. Hutchinson gasped, pressing a hand to her chest, but Jake didn't move, just waited with the stillness of a coiled snake. "Is there a problem here?" Sheriff Sullivan filled the doorway, his presence immediately diffusing the tension. His eyes took in the scene. His potential son-in-law squared off against the stranger he'd warned out of town. "No problem, Sheriff," Thornton said, though his voice was tight. "Just introducing myself to our visitor." "That's neighborly of you. William." Sullivan's tone was dry as dust. "Why don't you run along? I believe Emma's at the church with her mother." Thornton left with obvious reluctance, shooting one last glare at Jake. When he was gone, Sullivan took the chair across from Jake without invitation. "Son, you're playing a dangerous game." Jake met his gaze. "I'm not playing anything. Sheriff, just trying to have my breakfast in peace. Don't take me for a fool." Sullivan's voice was quiet, but carried steel. "I know who you are. Jake Morgan. Or should I say, Blackjack. That wanted poster doesn't do you justice, but it's close enough." Jake's hand inched toward his gun, but Sullivan made no move for his own weapon. "Relax, son. If I was going to arrest you, I'd have done it already. $500 is good money, but I've got bigger concerns. Your daughter." Sullivan's jaw tightened. "Emma's a good girl, but she's got romantic notions. Reads too many of those dime novels about outlaws and adventure. She doesn't understand what men like you really are. And what's that?" "Death," Sullivan said simply. "Your death and heartbreak in a shallow grave by the side of some lonely road. You're everything I've spent my life protecting this town from." Jake couldn't argue. Everything the sheriff said was true. "But you're also a man," Sullivan continued, surprising him. "And I can see my daughter's caught your eye, just like you've caught hers, so I'm going to make you a deal." Jake waited. "Leave town today, and I'll forget I know who you are. Stay, and I'll make your life difficult. Not arrest you. That would just make you romantic in Emma's eyes. But I'll dog your every step. Make sure you don't have a moment alone with her. Eventually, you'll get tired of it and move on. Men like you always do. And if I don't," Sullivan's eyes went hard, "then we'll settle it the way men settle things out here. And trust me, son, I've buried better men than you." He stood, adjusting his gun belt. "Think about it, Morgan. You've got until sundown to decide." After he left, Jake sat in the empty dining room, cold coffee growing bitter in his cup. The sensible part of him, the part that had kept him alive through 6 years of running, screamed at him to take the deal, saddle up and ride out, find another town, another hideout. But he kept thinking about Emma's whispered words. The old Miller cabin, noon, outside. Thunder rolled closer, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Jake looked at the clock on the mantel. 11:30. He stood, reaching for his hat. Some decisions, he reflected, were made the moment you met someone's eyes and saw your own hunger reflected back at you. He'd made this choice yesterday in a dusty stable, looking into green eyes that promised trouble. The rain was falling harder as he walked to the livery stable, The street was turning to mud, and most folks had taken shelter. Good. Fewer eyes to see which direction he rode. Midnight greeted him with a soft nicker, eager to stretch his legs. Jake saddled him quickly, his movements automatic after years of practice. "You heading out, mister?" The stable boy, a gap-toothed kid maybe 12 years old, watched from the doorway. Jake flipped him a coin. "Taking a ride, checking out the territory north of town." The boy's eyes widened. "In this weather, trail gets mighty slippery when it's wet. And that old Miller place." He stopped, face reddening. "What about it?" "Nothing, sir, just folks say it's haunted. The Millers lost their little girl to fever, and some nights you can hear her crying." The boy shrugged. "Course, that's just talk." Jake mounted up. Sometimes talk is all folks have. He rode out into the storm, feeling the weight of eyes on his back, from the sheriff's office, from the boarding house, from behind a dozen rain-streaked windows. The whole town was watching, waiting to see what the stranger would do. The trail north was indeed treacherous, turned to a river of mud by the downpour, but Midnight was sure-footed, and Jake had ridden through worse. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark relief, the scattered pines, the rocky outcroppings, and there, nestled in a grove of cottonwoods, the abandoned Miller cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney. Jake's hand went to his gun as he approached, but then the door opened, and Emma stood there, soaked to the skin despite the shelter of the porch, her hair hanging in wet ribbons around her face. "You came," she said simply. "You knew I would." She smiled then, that dangerous smile that made him forget all of Sheriff Sullivan's warnings. "Come in out of the rain. Jake Morgan, yes, I know who you are, and I don't care." Thunder crashed overhead as Jake dismounted and followed her into the cabin, knowing he was crossing a line he could never uncross. But some lines, he was learning, were meant to be crossed, even if they led you straight to hell. The door closed behind them, shutting out the storm, but not the feeling that everything was about to change. The storm had passed, leaving Clearwater Ridge washed clean and gleaming under a pale sun. Jake stood outside the telegraph office, reading the message that had just come through. His jaw tightened as he crumpled the paper and shoved it into his pocket. Bad news? He turned to find Emma approaching, a basket of fresh bread from the bakery on her arm. They'd been careful since that day at the Miller cabin, meeting only in public places, exchanging nothing more than polite greetings. But the memory of rain-soaked clothes and whispered confessions hung between them like smoke. "Nothing I didn't expect," Jake said. "Just word that some old friends are heading this way." Emma's eyes sharpened. She understood immediately. Not friends, but enemies, men who wanted the bounty on his head. "How long?" 2, maybe 3 days. "You should leave." The words came out steady, but he caught the tremor underneath. "Yeah, I should." But he didn't move, just stood there looking at her in the afternoon light. 2 weeks he'd stayed in Clearwater Ridge, 2 weeks of Sheriff Sullivan's watchful eyes and William Thornton's barely concealed hostility. 2 weeks of stolen glances and careful distances, and a hunger that grew stronger every day. "Walk with me," Emma said suddenly. "Just to the church. Perfectly respectable." They walked side by side, not touching, while the town bustled around them. Jake noticed how folks stepped aside for Emma, tipping their hats, but their eyes followed him with suspicion. He was still the stranger, still the outsider who didn't belong. "My father knows," Emma said quietly as they passed the schoolhouse. "About us meeting at the cabin, Mrs. Morrison saw Midnight tied up outside." Jake cursed under his breath. "What did he say?" "Nothing. That's what worries me." She paused at the church steps. "Jake, there's something else. William Thornton has been talking to my father. He wants to announce our engagement at the harvest dance next week. You tell him yes?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "I told him I'd rather marry a rattlesnake, but my father, he thinks it's time I settled down. Says I'm getting too old to be so particular." She was 22, practically a spinster by frontier standards. The church doors opened, and Reverend Morrison emerged, his wife at his side. Adelaide Morrison's face soured when she saw Jake. "Miss Sullivan," the Reverend said warmly. "Mr. Morgan," Jake supplied, touching his hat brim. "Ah, yes, the gentleman who's been staying at the boarding house." The Reverend's tone was neutral, but his wife sniffed audibly. "Planning to join us for services this Sunday?" "Haven't decided yet, Reverend." "Well, you'd be welcome. Every soul needs salvation. Mr. Morgan." After they left, Emma turned to face Jake fully. "There's going to be trouble. I can feel it building like another storm." She was right. Jake had survived this long by reading the signs, and everything pointed to violence coming. The question was from which direction, the hunters on his trail or the men in town who saw him as a threat. That evening, Jake sat in the Silver Dollar, nursing a whiskey and playing a lazy hand of poker with some local ranchers. The conversation was sparse, focused on cattle prices and the weather. Then the door swung open, bringing a gust of cool air and trouble. 3 men entered, trail-worn and hard-eyed. Jake recognized the type immediately: bounty hunters. Professional manhunters who made their living bringing in men like him. The leader was tall and lean, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. His hand rested on a well-worn Schofield revolver. "Evening, gentlemen," the scarred man said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet saloon. "Name's Cole Ramsey. My associates and I are looking for someone, hoping you fine folks might help." Murphy, behind the bar, kept polishing glasses like nothing was happening. "We get a lot of folks through here, Mr. Anyone in particular?" Ramsey pulled out a folded paper, shook it open. Jake didn't need to see it to know it was his wanted poster. "Jake Morgan, also goes by Black Jack, $500 bounty, dead or alive. Heard he might have passed through these parts." "Can't say I've seen anyone matching that description," Murphy said evenly. "We're a peaceful town. Outlaws tend to avoid us." Ramsey's smile was cold. "That's so. Well, we'll be staying a few days, asking around. Sometimes folks remember things after thinking on it a spell." His eyes swept the room, lingering on each face. When they reached Jake, they paused. Jake kept his expression neutral, focusing on his cards. But he could feel the weight of that stare. "You there?" Ramsey said. "You look familiar. We met before?" Jake looked up slowly. "Don't believe so. Got one of those faces, I guess. Maybe." Ramsey studied him a moment longer, then turned away. "Well, if anyone sees this Morgan fellow, you let us know. We're staying at the hotel. There's a finder's fee for good information." After they left, the saloon stayed quiet for a long moment. Then conversations resumed, but subdued, nervous. Jake folded his hand and stood. "Where are you going?" one of the ranchers asked. "Need some air." Outside, the night was clear and cool. Jake walked toward the livery stable, mind racing. He should saddle Midnight right now, slip out while the hunters were settling in at the hotel. But as he passed the sheriff's office, the door opened. "Morgan." Sheriff Sullivan stepped out, his badge catching the lamplight. "Saw we had visitors." "Yeah. Cole Ramsey, he's good at what he does. Brought in the Decatur brothers last year, all 3 of them. Of course, they were dead when he delivered them." Sullivan's voice was conversational, but his eyes were hard. "You planning to bring that kind of trouble to my town?" "I didn't invite them." "No, but you didn't leave when I gave you the chance either." The sheriff sighed. "I've been doing some thinking. Morgan, about you, about my daughter, about what's best for everyone." Jake waited. "Emma came to me today. Told me straight out that if I force her to marry William Thornton, she'll run, with or without you." Sullivan's jaw worked. "I've never seen her like that. Determined, desperate, maybe. She's not thinking clear." "Don't," Sullivan held up a hand. "Don't insult either of us by pretending you don't care about her. I've seen how you look at each other when you think no one's watching." Thunder rumbled in the distance. Another storm building. "Here's what's going to happen," Sullivan continued. "Those bounty hunters are going to sniff around for a few days. You're going to lay low, Stay out of sight. Let them think you've moved on. Once they leave, you and I are going to have a conversation about your intentions toward my daughter. And if they figure out who I am before then, Sullivan's hand dropped to his gun. Then I'll do what I have to do to protect my town. But Morgan, I'd rather it not come to that. Emma would never forgive me. He walked away, leaving Jake alone on the dark street. In the distance, lightning flickered over the mountains. The storm was coming whether they were ready or not. Jake made his decision. Instead of the livery stable, he headed back to the boarding house. He'd stay, for now. Not because it was smart, but because somewhere in this town, Emma Sullivan was probably standing at her window, watching the same lightning, feeling the same pull he did. The bounty hunters were just one more danger in a life full of them. But Emma, she was something else entirely. She was possibility and hope and maybe even redemption, if a man like him could claim such a thing. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Jake climbed the stairs to his room. Through the thin walls, he could hear the other boarders settling in for the night. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. For a moment, he let himself imagine what that might be like. To sleep without one hand on his gun. To wake without checking for threats. To love a woman without bringing death to her doorstep. But imagination was all it was. Come morning, he'd still be Jake Morgan, outlaw and killer. With 3 professional hunters on his trail and a sheriff's daughter he had no right to want. The storm broke in earnest, rain hammering against the windows. Jake sat on the narrow bed, cleaning his coat by lamplight, and prepared for what was coming, because storms always passed, but they left destruction in their wake. And this one, he knew, would be no different. The chase began at dawn. Jake had been watching from his window when Cole Ramsey and his men mounted up, heading south on a false lead Murphy had planted about seeing a stranger matching Jake's description riding toward Mesa Verde. But Jake knew they'd be back by nightfall when the trail went cold. He needed to move, to find somewhere to lay low until they gave up and moved on. The old Garrett Ranch had a hay barn a mile outside town, abandoned since the drought drove the family east. It would do. Jake slipped out the back of the boarding house, keeping to the shadows. The town was just waking up, shopkeepers unlocking doors and sweeping storefronts. He made it to the livery stable without being seen, saddled Midnight quickly, and rode out through the back gate. The morning was crisp and clear. No sign of last night's storm, except puddles reflecting the early light. Jake kept Midnight at an easy pace, not wanting to attract attention. The Garrett place sat in a hollow between 2 hills, hidden from the main road. The barn stood solid despite years of neglect. Its red paint faded to the color of dried blood. Jake led Midnight inside, noting the piles of old hay still stacked in the loft, dusty but dry. It would serve. He was settling Midnight in a stall when he heard hoofbeats approaching. His hand went to his gun, but then he recognized the rider, Emma, wearing men's clothes, probably her father's old things. Her hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. "You shouldn't be here," Jake said as she dismounted. "Neither should you." She led her horse inside, her movements confident. "The whole town saw Ramsey ride out. They'll know you're hiding somewhere. Let them know, long as they don't know where." Emma pulled off her hat, and her hair tumbled free, catching the light filtering through the gaps in the barn walls. "How long are you planning to hide?" "Until they move on. Few days, maybe a week. And then," Jake didn't answer. They both knew there would always be another Ramsey, another town, another chase. This was his life. Emma moved closer, and Jake caught that scent of lavender again, mixed now with the leather and horse. "There's another way, Jake." "No, there isn't. You could turn yourself in. My father has connections. Maybe they could..." "Could what? Get me life in prison instead of hanging?" Jake shook his head. "That's no life. Emma." "Neither is this." The words burst out of her, fierce and desperate. "Always running, always looking over your shoulder. What kind of life is that?" "The only kind I know." She reached up, her fingers tracing the scar on his jaw. A souvenir from a knife fight in Amarillo. It doesn't have to be. Jake caught her hand, meaning to push it away, but instead found himself holding it against his cheek. Emma, you don't understand. The things I've done. I don't care. You should. His voice was rough. I've killed men, robbed banks and stages. I'm everything your father says I am. No, Emma said softly. You're more than that. I've seen it. The way you are with your horse. Gentle and patient. The way you helped Mrs. Chen when those cowboys were harassing her at the mercantile. The way you look when you think no one's watching, like a man who's tired of being what everyone expects him to be. Jake closed his eyes. She saw too much. This sheriff's daughter with her green eyes and dangerous dreams. I can't change what I am. Emma, I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to choose. She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her. Choose something different. Choose me. The barn was dim and quiet. Dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight. Outside, a meadowlark sang, its voice pure and sweet. Everything felt suspended, balanced on the edge of a moment that would change everything. Your father would hunt me to the ends of the earth. Then we'll go beyond the ends of the earth. Emma's eyes were bright with unshed tears. California, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere we can start fresh, be different people. You don't know what you're saying. Life on the run would be better than a life in a cage. She pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt. Jake, I'm suffocating here. Every day, I die a little more. If you leave without me, I'll... He kissed her then, cutting off words that were too dangerous to hear. She made a small sound, surprise or relief, and melted against him. Her lips were soft and eager, tasting of coffee and determination. Jake had kissed women before, saloon girls and widows, women who knew what he was and didn't care. But this was different. This was Emma, who saw past the wanted posters to something he'd thought was long dead. When they broke apart, both breathing hard. Emma's cheeks were flushed and her eyes were dark. Jake, shh. He pressed his forehead to hers, trying to think past the want coursing through his veins. We can't. Your father isn't here. Emma's hand slid up to cup his face. No one is. Just us. The hay barn was warm and golden in the morning light. Up in the loft, old hay created a soft nest, private and secret. Jake knew he should stop this, should send her away before they crossed a line that would change everything. But Emma was already pulling him toward the ladder, her eyes holding promises and challenges in equal measure. Emma, if we do this, then we do this, she said simply. I'm not a child. Jake, I know what I want. They climbed to the loft, where the air was thick with the sweet scent of old hay and possibilities. Emma spread her coat over the hay, creating a makeshift bed. When she turned to face him, there was no hesitation in her eyes, only certainty. Are you sure? Jake asked, giving her one last chance to run. Instead of answering, she began unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers steady despite the flush on her cheeks. I've been sure since the moment you warned me to stay away. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the golden light, the whisper of hay, the catch of breath, and the slide of skin against skin. Jake tried to be gentle, mindful of her innocence. But Emma was having none of it. She met him with a passion that matched his own, as wild and untamed as the frontier itself. Afterward, they lay entwined in the hay, Emma's head on Jake's chest, listening to his heartbeat. He played with her hair, marveling at how it caught the light like spun gold. No regrets? He asked. None. She traced patterns on his chest, her touch light as butterfly wings. You? Only that I can't give you the life you deserve. Emma propped herself up on an elbow, looking down at him with those dangerous green eyes. The life I deserve is the one I choose, and I choose you. Jake Morgan, outlaw and all. He pulled her down for another kiss, slower this time, savoring the taste of her. But even as he lost himself in her warmth, part of him stayed alert, listening for hoofbeats, for danger approaching, because danger always approached. It was the one constant in his life. The sun climbed higher, marking the passage of time they didn't have. Soon, Emma would be missed. Soon, Ramsey would return. Soon, choices would have to be made. But for now, in this stolen moment in a forgotten barn, Jake Morgan let himself believe in possibilities. Let himself imagine a future where he could wake up next to this woman without checking for his gun first, where the only thing chasing them was the sunrise. Emma stirred against him, and he tightened his arms around her, holding on to the moment, holding on to her, knowing that whatever came next, she, had been worth any price he'd have to pay. Outside, that meadowlark still sang, and the world went on spinning, unaware that in a hay barn outside Clearwater Ridge, an outlaw and a sheriff's daughter had just changed the course of their lives forever. The sweet scent of hay would forever after remind him of this morning, of Emma's courage and passion, of the moment when running stopped being about escape and started being about running towards someone worth catching. The news spread through Clearwater Ridge like wildfire in dry grass. By the time Emma returned home, trying to slip in through the back door, her mother was waiting in the kitchen, face pale and drawn. Margaret Sullivan had always been a handsome woman, but worry had etched new lines around her eyes. "Where have you been?" The question came out sharp, accusatory. Emma smoothed her skirts, acutely aware of the hay dust clinging to the fabric. "I went for a ride. The morning was so beautiful after the storm." "Don't lie to me, Emma Louise." Her mother's voice cracked. "Mrs. Morrison saw you riding out dressed in your father's old clothes. And now the whole town is talking." "Talking about what?" "About you and that outlaw. About how you've been meeting him in secret." Margaret sank into a chair, suddenly looking older than her years. "Oh, Emma, what have you done?" Before Emma could answer, the front door slammed. Sheriff Sullivan's boots rang heavy on the floorboards as he strode into the kitchen. His face was thunderous, a vein pulsing in his temple. "Is it true?" He didn't need to specify what. Emma lifted her chin, meeting his gaze straight on. "Yes." The silence stretched taut as a hangman's rope. Then Sullivan's fist crashed down on the table, making both women jump. "That man is a killer, a thief. He's everything I've spent my life fighting against. And you—" He stopped, struggling for control. "You gave yourself to him like some saloon—" "Thomas," Margaret's voice was sharp. "That's enough." "Is it?" Sullivan rounded on his wife. "Our daughter has ruined herself with an outlaw, and you want me to watch my language. I love him." Emma's quiet words fell into the storm like stones into a pond. Her father's laugh was bitter. "Love? You don't know what love is. Girl, love is what your mother and I have. Built on respect, on shared values, on settling for what's expected," Emma interrupted. "On giving up your dreams because it's the sensible thing to do?" "Emma!" her mother gasped, but Emma was past caring. The secret was out. There was no point in hiding anymore. "I won't marry William Thornton. I won't spend my life pouring tea and pretending to care about his bank's profits. I'd rather die." "That can be arranged," Sullivan said coldly. "Because you're dead to this town now, girl. No decent man will have you. Not after—" "Good." Emma stood, her hands steady despite the trembling in her chest. "I don't want a decent man. I want Jake." Sullivan's hand moved to his gun. "That bastard is leaving town today, one way or another. Then I'm going with him, over my dead body. Or his." Emma stepped closer to her father, saw him flinch at her words. "Because that's what you're planning, isn't it? To kill him? If I have to, then you'll have to kill me too." Emma's voice was calm, resolved. "Because I'll stand between you and him. I'll take the bullet meant for him. Is that what you want, Papa? Your daughter's blood on your hands?" Margaret made a sound, half sob, half prayer. Sullivan's face had gone white. "He's ruined you," he said finally, his voice hollow. "That outlaw has ruined my little girl." "No," Emma said softly. "He set me free." She turned and walked out, ignoring her mother's calls, her father's threats. The town square was busy with afternoon traffic, but conversation stopped as she passed. She could feel the weight of their stares, their judgment. News traveled fast in Clearwater Ridge. At the Mercantile, Mrs. Chen was sweeping the front steps. She looked up as Emma approached, and instead of the condemnation Emma expected, the older woman's face held sympathy. "Miss Emma," she said quietly. "You need supplies?" Emma hadn't thought that far ahead, but yes, if she and Jake were leaving, they'd need provisions. "Yes, please." Mrs. Chen ushered her inside, away from prying eyes. As she gathered items, dried beans, salt pork, ammunition, she spoke in her lilting English. "My husband and I, we come here 15 years ago. Everyone stare, everyone whisper. Those Chinese, they say, they different, they don't belong. But we stay, we work hard. And now," she gestured around the well-stocked store, "now we belong. It's not the same." Emma said, "No, love is love, Miss Emma. And choosing love over easy path, that take courage." She pressed a small bag into Emma's hands. "Tea, from my homeland, for strength on journey." Emma's eyes burned with sudden tears. "Thank you." She was loading the supplies onto her horse when William Thornton appeared, his face flushed with drink and anger. "So it's true," he spat. "You spread your legs for that outlaw trash." Emma turned slowly. "What I do is no longer your concern." "William." "The hell it isn't." He grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "We had an understanding. Your father promised—" "My father promised you nothing?" Emma tried to pull free, but his grip tightened. "Let go. You were supposed to be mine." His breath reeked of whiskey. "I waited. I courted you proper, and you throw it all away for some saddle tramp who'll abandon you the first chance he gets." "Let her go." Jake's voice came from behind them, cold as winter wind. He stood in the street, hand hovering near his gun, eyes fixed on Thornton. "You!" Thornton released Emma, spinning to face Jake. "You dare show your face in town after what you've done?" "What I've done?" Jake moved closer, positioning himself between Thornton and Emma. "You mean treating a lady with respect instead of like property?" Thornton's face purpled. "She was pure until you—" The punch came fast, Jake's fist connecting with Thornton's jaw with a satisfying crack. The banker's son went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. "Jake, no!" Emma caught his arm as he moved forward. Around them, people were gathering, drawn by the commotion. Thornton struggled to his feet, reaching for the derringer in his vest pocket, but before he could draw, another voice cut through the crowd. "That's enough!" Sheriff Sullivan stood at the edge of the crowd, flanked by his deputies. His eyes were hard as flint as they fixed on Jake. "Morgan, you're under arrest." "For what?" Emma demanded. "Defending me?" "For being who he is." Sullivan's voice was flat. "Cole Ramsey confirmed it an hour ago. This man is wanted in 3 states. It's my duty to bring him in." Jake's hand moved to his gun, but Emma stepped in front of him. "No, there's been enough violence." "Emma, move aside," her father ordered. "I won't." "Then you'll hang with him." The crowd gasped. Margaret Sullivan pushed through, her face stricken. "Thomas, you can't mean that." "Can't I?" The sheriff's voice was cold. "She's chosen her side. Let her live with the consequences." Jake gently moved Emma aside. "This is my fight, not yours." "No." She gripped his hand. "It's ours." Sullivan drew his gun, and suddenly the street erupted. Women screamed. Men dove for cover, but before anyone could fire, a new commotion arose from the far end of town. Cole Ramsey and his men were riding in hard, but they weren't alone. Behind them, eating their dust, came a group of riders Emma didn't recognize, hard-faced men with murder in their eyes. "Sheriff," Ramsey shouted, "we got trouble. The Garrison gang. They followed us here." Jake went rigid beside Emma. The Garrison gang. He'd ridden with them years ago, before a disagreement over a bank job in Kansas led to bloodshed. They'd sworn to kill him if they ever crossed paths again, and now they had. "Everyone inside," Sullivan barked, temporarily forgetting about Jake as the greater threat approached. "Deputies, get the women and children to safety." But Emma didn't move. She stood with Jake in the middle of the street, watching their past and future collide in a cloud of dust and destiny. Whatever happened next, she knew their time for running had come. The question was whether they'd be running together or dying in the dirt of Clearwater Ridge. The Garrison gang rode in like the apocalypse, 8 men armed to the teeth, led by Frank Garrison himself. Jake hadn't seen Frank in 3 years, but time hadn't softened the man's features. If anything, the outlaw leader looked meaner, his face a map of scars and bitter memories. Well, Frank drawled, reining in his horse in the middle of Main Street. "Blackjack Morgan, been looking for you a long time. Partner." The street had erupted in chaos. Mothers grabbed children and ran for cover. Shopkeepers slammed shutters closed, but Jake stood his ground. Emma still beside him despite his attempts to push her to safety. "Frank," Jake acknowledged, his hand steady near his gun. "Figured you'd catch up eventually." 3 years. Frank spat in the dust. 3 years since you shot my brother and rode off with our take from the Dodge City job. Your brother drew first," Jake said evenly, "and that money wasn't yours to claim." Sheriff Sullivan and his deputies had taken positions behind water troughs and barrels, guns drawn but not yet aimed. Jake could see the sheriff's dilemma. The Garrison gang was the bigger threat, but Jake was still a wanted man. "Sheriff," Frank called out, not taking his eyes off Jake. "I know you got paper on Morgan here. How about we make a deal? You let us settle our business with him, and we'll ride on peaceful like." "This is my town," Sullivan replied, his voice carrying across the tense street. "Nobody settles anything without my say-so." Frank laughed, an ugly sound. "Your town? Look around. Lawman, you got, what, 3 deputies? I got 8 men, all veterans of more gunfights than you've had hot dinners. You sure you want to make this stand over one worthless outlaw?" "Jake's not worthless," Emma's voice rang out clear and defiant. Every eye turned to her as she stepped forward, her chin raised despite the danger. "Emma, get back," Jake warned through gritted teeth. But she stood firm. "These men want to kill someone who defended himself. Where's the justice in that?" Frank's eyes narrowed as he took in Emma's appearance, her good dress, her defiant stance, the way she stood close to Jake. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Well now, this is interesting. Blackjack Morgan's got himself a woman, a respectable woman, by the look of her." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Tell me, miss, you know what your man did to earn his name? How many men he's killed?" "I know who he is," Emma said steadily. "And I know who I am. I'm the woman who loves him." The confession, public and proud, sent murmurs through the watching townspeople. Jake saw Sheriff Sullivan's face darken, saw William Thornton pushing through the crowd with a rifle. "This changes things," Frank mused. "See, I was just going to kill Morgan quick, but now," his hand moved to his gun, "now I think I'll make him watch while we have some fun with his woman first." The threat was barely out of Frank's mouth when Jake drew. His Colt cleared leather faster than thought, the shot echoing off the buildings. Frank's gun went flying, his hand bloodied. Then all hell broke loose. The Garrison gang opened fire. Jake grabbed Emma, diving behind a wagon as bullets splintered wood around them. Sheriff Sullivan and his deputies returned fire, caught now in a battle they hadn't chosen but couldn't avoid. "Stay down." Jake pushed Emma flat, then rose to fire over the wagon's edge. One of Garrison's men spun and fell. The air filled with gun smoke and the crack of rifles. Windows shattered. Horses screamed and scattered. Jake saw Murphy firing from the saloon doorway with a shotgun. Saw misses. Chen pulling a wounded citizen to safety. "Jake!" Emma's warning came just in time. He spun to see one of the gang flanking them. Gun raised. Before Jake could react, a shot rang out and the man crumpled. William Thornton stood there, rifle smoking, his face grim. "Don't think this makes us even Morgan," he shouted over the gunfire. "But nobody threatens our women." More townspeople were joining the fight now, grabbing rifles and pistols. Whatever their feelings about Jake, The garrison gang had threatened their town, and frontier folk didn't take kindly to that. Frank Garrison, his gun hand useless, screamed orders from cover. "Kill them all! Burn the whole damn town if you have to!" Jake saw his chance. While the gang was pinned down by fire from multiple directions, he could reach midnight, could get Emma to safety. But as he turned to tell her his plan, he saw Sheriff Sullivan go down, clutching his shoulder. "Papa!" Emma started to rise, but Jake held her back. "He's alive," Jake said, seeing the sheriff moving, trying to reload one-handed. "But he needs help." The decision crystallized in that moment. Jake had spent years running, years looking out for nobody but himself. But Emma had changed that. This town, for all its judgment, had become something he'd never had, a place worth defending. "Cover me," he told Emma, pressing his spare pistol into her hands. "Jake, what are you—" But he was already moving, running low across the open ground toward the sheriff. Bullets whined past his head, kicked up dust at his feet. He slid into cover beside Sullivan, whose face was pale with pain and blood loss. "Trying to get yourself killed?" the sheriff gasped. "Trying to keep you alive," Jake corrected, tearing off his bandana to bind the wound. "Emma would never forgive me if I let you die." Sullivan studied him with eyes that were starting to understand. "You really love her." "More than my life," Jake admitted, finishing the rough bandage. "Can you move?" "I can fight." Sullivan struggled to sit up. "But Morgan, Jake, after this is over." "I know." Jake helped him to a better position. "But let's live through it first." Together, the outlaw and the lawman opened fire on the garrison gang. It was a strange partnership, but effective. Jake's quick gun and Sullivan's tactical mind worked in unexpected harmony. The tide was turning. 3 of Garrison's men were down, and 2 more were trying to flee. Frank himself was cornered behind an overturned cart, bleeding and desperate. "Morgan!" Frank's voice was raw with hate. "Face me like a man, one-on-one!" Jake looked at Sullivan, who nodded slowly. This was the code of the West. Some fights had to be settled man to man. Jake stepped into the open. "Let him out!" He called to the townspeople. "This is between us." Frank emerged, his left hand awkwardly gripping his gun. Even wounded. He was dangerous. The street fell silent except for the moaning of wounded men and the distant barking of dogs. "You took everything from me," Frank snarled. "My brother, my gang, my reputation. You took those things yourself," Jake replied. "With your greed and your cruelty. I just survived it." They stood 20 paces apart. The classic distance for a duel. Jake could feel Emma watching, could sense the whole town holding its breath. Frank went for his gun. Jake's draw was smooth, automatic, the result of years of practice and too many fights like this one. His shot took Frank's center mass. The gang leader's shot went wild, shattering a window behind Jake. Frank Garrison fell to his knees, then forward into the dust. His remaining men threw down their weapons, hands raised in surrender. It was over. As the gun smoke cleared, Jake turned to find Emma running toward him. She threw herself into his arms, heedless of the watching crowd, and he held her tight, breathing in the scent of lavender mixed with gunpowder. "Don't ever do that again," she whispered fiercely. "Which part?" Jake asked, allowing himself a small smile. "The heroics or the gunfighting?" "Any of it, all of it." She pulled back to look at him, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "I thought I'd lost you." "Takes more than Frank Garrison to put me down," Jake said, but his voice was gentle. Sheriff Sullivan approached, supported by one of his deputies. His arm was in a sling, but his eyes were clear. He looked at Jake for a long moment, taking in the man who'd saved his life, who'd defended his town, who loved his daughter. "Morgan," he said finally, "we need to talk." The doctor finished wrapping Sheriff Sullivan's shoulder as the afternoon sun slanted through the jail office windows. Jake sat across from the sheriff, his own minor wounds tended, waiting for judgment. Emma stood between them, refusing to leave despite her father's repeated requests. "You saved my life," Sullivan said finally. his voice heavy with the weight of that truth. You could have run when the shooting started, could have grabbed Emma and disappeared in the chaos. Why didn't you? Jake met his gaze steadily. Because running's no way to start a life together. And because... He paused, searching for words that had never come easy. Because for the first time in years, I had something worth fighting for instead of running from... Sullivan leaned back, wincing at the movement. Outside, they could hear the town beginning to recover, broken glass being swept up, wounded being tended, the garrison gang's survivors being locked in cells. Cole Ramsey wants to take you in, the sheriff continued. Says the bounty's still good, heroics or not. I know. The town council's meeting tonight. Half of them want to give you a medal, the other half want to see you hang. Sullivan's laugh was bitter. And then there's my daughter, who's made it clear she'll follow you to hell itself if need be. Papa, Emma said softly. Please, I'm not finished. Sullivan's eyes never left Jake's face. I've been a lawman for 20 years. I've always believed in black and white, right and wrong, law and order. But today, he shook his head. Today I saw an outlaw risk his life to save mine. Saw him stand with our town against men who would have burned it down. That's got me thinking. Margaret Sullivan entered then, her face drawn but determined. She moved to her husband's side, but her eyes were on Jake. Mr. Morgan, she said, I won't pretend I'm happy about what's happened between you and Emma, but I saw what you did today. A bad man wouldn't have stayed to fight for people who despised him. Plenty of bad men do good things sometimes. Jake said, doesn't change what they are. Maybe not, Margaret agreed. But good men sometimes do bad things too. The question is, which are you at heart? Jake looked at Emma, saw the faith in her eyes, the love that hadn't wavered even in the face of gunfire and death. I don't know, ma'am, but I'd like the chance to find out. Sullivan stood with effort, moving to the window that overlooked Main Street. The repairs had already begun, townsfolk working together to fix what the violence had broken. There's a ranch, he said slowly, about 50 miles north. Belongs to my brother-in-law. He's been looking for a foreman, someone good with horses, not afraid of hard work, someone who can handle trouble if it comes calling. Jake understood what was being offered, a chance, a new start, far enough away that his past might not follow immediately. The pay's honest, but not much. Sullivan continued. And it's lonely country, but a man could make a life there, maybe even raise a family, if he was so inclined. Thomas, Margaret said softly, and Jake heard years of marriage in that single word. Surprise, gratitude, and gentle reproach all mixed together. Sullivan turned from the window. I can't make your past go away. Morgan, there's still paper on you, still men who'll come looking, but I can give you time. Ramsey's agreed to report that Jake Morgan died in the shootout with the garrison gang. As far as the law is concerned, you're a dead man. And if Jake Morgan's dead, Emma asked, hope lighting her face, then John Matthews, that's the name on the papers I'll prepare, can marry my daughter and try to make an honest life. Sullivan's face was stern, but Jake caught something else in his eyes. But if you hurt her, if you go back to your old ways, if you make me regret this, you won't, Jake said simply. I give you my word, the word of an outlaw. Sullivan mused. A year ago, I'd have laughed at that, but now, he extended his good hand. Now I'm betting my daughter's future on it. Jake stood and shook the sheriff's hand, feeling the weight of the trust being offered. It was more than he deserved, more than he'd dared hope for. Emma moved to Jake's side, slipping her hand into his. When do we leave? Tomorrow, her father said. Tonight, we bury the dead and let the town see Jake Morgan among them. Come dawn, John and Emma Matthews can start their journey north. That evening, as promised, the town gathered to bury those who'd fallen in the gunfight. Jake stood with the mourners, hat in hand, as Reverend Morrison said words over the graves. Frank Garrison and his men were buried outside the cemetery proper, but they were buried decent. It was the Western way. Later, in the Sullivan home, Emma and her mother packed her things while Jake and the sheriff went over maps and plans. It was surreal. Sitting at the family table with the man who'd wanted him dead just days before. "This brother-in-law of yours?" Jake asked. "He know what he's getting?" "Jim knows I wouldn't send him a man I didn't trust." Sullivan said, "That'll be enough for him. The rest is up to you to prove." As the evening wore on, visitors came by, Mrs. Chen with packages of tea and preserves, Murphy with a bottle of good whiskey for the road. Even William Thornton, stiff and formal but sincere in his wishes for Emma's happiness. The town had seen Jake Morgan's true character in the crucible of violence and found it worthy of a second chance. That night, Jake stood on the Sullivan porch, looking out at Clearwater Ridge one last time. Emma joined him, wrapped in a shawl against the cool air. "Any regrets?" she asked, echoing his question from the hay barn. "Only that it took me so long to stop running," Jake admitted, pulling her close. "You weren't ready before," Emma said wisely. "Neither was I. We both needed to be who we were to become who we are." Jake smiled at that, pressing a kiss to her hair. Tomorrow they'd leave as man and wife, heading north to a new life. There would be challenges. His past wouldn't stay buried forever, and building a life from nothing was never easy. But they'd face it together. The old Miller cabin, the hay barn, the dusty streets where they'd fought and bled. All of it had led to this moment. Jake Morgan, outlaw and killer, would die tonight. But John Matthews, husband and hopeful rancher, would be born with the dawn. As they stood together in the darkness, the scent of hay drifted on the wind from some distant barn, and Jake remembered Emma's words from that day that seemed a lifetime ago. "Choose something different. Choose me." He had, and in choosing her, he'd chosen himself, the man he could be rather than the man he'd been. It was the greatest theft Jake Morgan had ever pulled off, stealing a future from the ashes of his past. The stars wheeled overhead, silent witnesses to the transformation. Somewhere in the darkness, a meadowlark sang its evening song, and Jake took it as a sign. Even outlaws could find redemption, if they were brave enough to stop running and fight for it. Tomorrow, their real journey would begin. But tonight, wrapped in the warmth of Emma's love and her family's hard-won acceptance, Jake Morgan finally understood what it meant to be home. In the morning, they would ride north together, into a future written not in wanted posters, but in hope. Not in gunfire, but in the quiet courage of daily choices. The outlaw and the sheriff's daughter, bound by love and hay-scented memories, ready to build something new from the wild soil of the frontier. And if sometimes, in the years to come, Jake would wake with his hand reaching for his gun, Emma would be there to remind him that John Matthews was a rancher, not a fighter, that the only things worth drawing now were water from the well and his wife into his arms. The past would always be there, casting its long shadow. But love, Jake was learning, cast a light that was stronger than any darkness. And in that light, even an outlaw could find his way home. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long drive across your own frontier. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Jake and Emma's journey? Your feedback means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more stories of love, redemption, and adventure from the American frontier. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.